Animation is the process of transitioning an object between two distinct states. Let's label them as A and B. When moving an object from state A to B, it does look like the object is changing its position, but with a sudden jump. To achieve a smooth transition, instead, we need to add the intermediary states referred to as in-betweens. Adding in-betweens like this between two states is called interpolation. Now the states can be anything that is the object's position, size, color, or even the shape itself. We can interpolate between any two states like this. In Rive, we can key in the states and the values will be interpolated in between. Let's do that in the next one. It's time we switch over to the Animate mode. To do that, we can click on the Animate tab from the toolbar or use the keyboard shortcut. By pressing tab on the keyboard, we can switch between the design and the Animate mode. In the Animate mode, we have our animation interface. Let's overview the same. On the left, we have the animations, that is the state machine and the timeline. By default, you will find these inside a new Rive file. If we want, we can click on the plus icon and add a new timeline or state machine. Next, I can click on the timeline and view the same, or double click on it and change its name. If we want to remove an existing state machine or timeline, let's say the state machine here, we can right click on the same and delete it like this. Let's get back to our animation timeline and preview the same. We have some options, a toolbar if you will. We can click on the play pause icon to play and pause our animation. We can set the animation mode from this drop down and enable or disable the work area. Then we have some shortcuts to move the playhead and selected keyframes, and a filter to show only selected layers in the animation timeline. To preview the same, I can select the ellipse and place a keyframe that appears in our animation timeline. Now if I go ahead and unselect the ellipse and enable the show selected filter, it will disappear from our animation timeline. It needs to be selected to appear in our timeline. It's a useful feature which we can use when working with multiple objects. Next, we have the graph editor, which we can toggle from here and edit our keyframes in the graph. And finally, we have the animation properties. We can set the position of the playhead from this input or by clicking and dragging it as well in the timeline. Next, we can set the animation duration. Right now, it is set to a second. We can set the duration in frames, seconds, and minutes. And that depends on the FPS as well. The snap keys set here. Right now, it is set to 60. So that will be a second. So if I go ahead and set the frames to say 30, that will be half a second. If I set it to, let's say 45, then that will be 3/4 of a second, maths. And then if I set the second value to 2, that will be 2 seconds of animation duration. Next, we have the playback speed. So if we want to control the overall animation speed without changing the keyframes, we can do it from here. Let's say we want it to be twice as fast. We can set the playback speed to 2x. If we want it to be half the speed, we can set it to 0.5. Again, let's set it back to the default value. And then we have the FPS count, that is the snap keys in our timeline. If I move the keyframe or the playhead, it will snap frame by frame, and that is 60 in 1 second. I can change that to 30 instead, and that will be the case. Now this value we set is only for snapping the keys, not the actual FPS for the rendered animation. So if we want to render our animation in this FPS value, we can enable quantize, and that will happen in the runtime. By default, whatever we set here is just for the editor snapping, and by default, it will render all the animations 60 frames per second, not 70. Now let's take a look at our timeline. That is, we can select the playhead, move it around to scrub through our animation, and then we can use the sliders at the top to control the zoom level of our timeline and the pan as well. And the same shortcuts we used on the stage can be used on the timeline as well. We can right click and drag to move the timeline around. We can hold down Control, use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out as well. Lastly, on the right, we have the interpolation panel from where we can set the curves and easing of our keyframes. And that's a general overview of the animation interface. Now we can go ahead and create animations. So let's do that in the next lesson. Now that we have familiarized ourselves with the Rive animation interface, let's go ahead and create a basic animation, sliding in the ellipse from the left to the center of the artboard, animating its position, maybe adding a fade in as well, controlling the opacity value. Now to create animations, we need to switch over to the animate mode. When I do that, notice the properties of the ellipse in the inspector. So if I switch over to the animate mode, we have diamonds beside each property's value. Using these diamonds, we can key in the value of the property at a specific point of time in the timeline and create animations. In this case, we want to animate the position or the X position of this ellipse. So we can key that in. One keyframe for the left position, another keyframe for the center position. So I can switch over to the animate mode and then select the ellipse and then place the playhead in the timeline or at the point where we want to place the keyframe, in this case at the start, and then click on the diamond beside the X position value and create a keyframe like this. I can expand the ellipse and view the position keyframe we just placed. If I want, I can change the value, let's say to 100, and place it to the left. Now, after some time, let's say half a second or 30 frames, I can change its position. That will be to the center. I can use the handles and move it to the center like this. A keyframe will be automatically placed because we have changed the position of our object. And now if I scrub between the two keyframes, we will get a interpolation like this. That is from 100 to 250. If I go ahead and place the playhead at the start and then click on the play button or hit the spacebar on the keyboard, we will play the animation and we have something like this, sliding the ellipse from left to right. Similarly, we can key in any property that has a diamond beside the same and create animations. Let's go ahead and key in the opacity 100% at the 30th frame and then move the playhead to the start and then set the opacity value to 0 and make it hidden. Now if I go ahead and play the animation, we get the fade in along with the slide. So we can key in any property and create animations like this. Another thing to note here is the distance between the keyframes. If I drag them closer to the first keyframes, we have a faster animation like this. And if I bring them farther away, we have a slower animation. So the closer the keyframes are, faster the animation will be. Farther away the keyframes are, slower the animation will be. So that's how we create animations in Rive with keyframes. Upon closer examination of the motion generated through the interpolation, you will notice that the object maintains a constant speed from start to finish, and naturally nothing moves like that except robots. When a motion starts, it gradually picks up speed and comes to a stop slowly as well. That is acceleration and deceleration. To replicate this organic behavior, we can manipulate the interpolation curve as well. By default, the curve follows a linear path, resulting in linear interpolation. Instead, we can introduce a curve to the initial segment of the animation. This adds a gradual start, imitating a slow acceleration. The impact of the interpolation curve on the motion is notable. Adjusting the curve causes the animation's movement to start slowly, distinguishing it from the prior abrupt start. This practice, referred to as easing, enables us to add realism to the animations. We can go ahead and apply easing to the end of the animation as well to apply some deceleration. Now the object starts slowly, stays steady in the middle and stops slowly at the end. In Rive, we can define the same from the interpolation panel. So that's the basics of easing. Let's go ahead and apply the same in the Rive editor as well. By default, the values between two keyframes are linearly interpolated. Instead, if we want to apply easing, we can come to the interpolation panel and change the type from linear to cubic instead. Before we do that, notice the motion path, which we can by selecting the position keyframes and preview the motion. Right now, we have the points evenly spaced because we have a linear interpolation. Instead, if I change it to cubic from the interpolation panel, notice the difference. Now the spacing has changed because at the start we have acceleration and at the end we have deceleration as well. That is easing in and easing out. I can play the animation with easing applied. We can change the easing curve from the interpolation panel, and by these handles I can drag them to change the curve, and if I hold down shift I can keep the line straight. Or we can edit these values as well. That is 4 values, X and Y for the bottom handle and X and Y for the top handle. The very left edge is 0. This right here, let's say if I want to place this to the very right, that will be 1 instead. And if I have that as 0.5, then that's in the middle. So that's how we can edit the easing curve. Next, let's look at hold. That is, if we don't want any interpolation at all, we can use the same. So I can remove the opacity for now, add another point that is keyframe, let's say to the right, 400 for the X position, and then preview the animation. For now, something like this, moving the lips from left to right. And then if I select the keyframes and change their interpolation to hold and preview the animation, we have something like this. The keyframes hold their position until the next keyframe. So no interpolation at all. Next, let's look at the cubic value interpolation. For that, I will animate the ellipse falling from the top. So position it at the top and then to the bottom, animating its Y position. Now I can select the keyframes and set the interpolation type to cubic value. Unlike before, we don't get the curve editor in the interpolation panel. Instead, we can edit our animation curve inside the graph editor. I can open the same from here or with this toggle. Inside the graph, we have the values on the left and the time on the top. I can select the ellipse and bring in its keyframes and use the handles to change the animation curve. Now if I play the animation, we have something like this. To create a new keyframe, of course, we can use the diamonds beside the properties, but in the graph editor, we can hover over the animation curve and create a new point or keyframe like this. We can bring the playhead to this position and change its value, or click and drag it as well like this and change the value. By default, the handle we get is asymmetric, using which we can change the curve. So I can move and change the length of the handles individually, but the angle will be shared between the two. Instead, if we want to detach the handles, we can hold down Alt or Option on the keyboard and then click and drag the handles to detach them like this. At any point, if you want back the asymmetric handle, you can click and drag any handle and it will go back to being an asymmetric handle like this. So let's go ahead and create a bounce animation for our ellipse. That is, it will go down, bounce up, and then go back to its position. For that, I can detach these handles. Let's go ahead and hold down Alt or Option, click and drag the handles, and create a bounce curve like this. I can change this one as well. And if I preview the animation, we have something like this. I can bring this keyframe a bit further and add another bounce or keyframe in the middle. So let's hover over the path, add another point or keyframe, position it at the top. I can set it to 425 around that. and then detach the handles to create the curve for our bounce like this. Let's bring this one a bit further and preview the animation. With the graph editor, we can kind of visualize the animation as well with the animation curve. So instead of editing the keyframes one by one in the graph editor, we can edit our animation as one continuous motion or path like this. Finally, let's look at the elastic curve. Right now, we have animation with linear interpolation. Instead, I can change it to cubic and make it a lot better, applying some easing, or I can change it to elastic curve and make it interesting as well. That is, with the elastic curve, we add a bit of bounce. That is, the ellipse right now overshoots a bit to the right before resting to its position. We can preview the elastic curve from the interpolation panel as well as edit it. We can edit the direction of the overshoot or the bounce. We can edit its amplitude and the period. The amplitude is the amount of overshoot. So right now amplitude is set to 1 and this is what we get. If I set it to say 2, then it will overshoot a lot more to the right than before. If I set it to 4, I can exaggerate the effect more like this. Let's set it back to 2. Next, if we want, we can select the direction as well. Instead of the end, if we want the bounce or the overshoot to happen at the start, I can set the direction to ease in instead. And now it will first step back and then go to the right like this. And if we want the bounce to happen in both directions, we can set it to ease in and out and get something like this. Finally, we have the period. So I'll set back the direction to ease out and then look at the period. That is the wave length. Using this, we can control the amount of bounce or back and forth. Right now, it is only once. If I want, I can change the number and instead of increasing it, we decrease the same because it is the wave length. As I mentioned before, if I decrease the value, let's say to 0.5, we decrease the amount of length between the waves and create more like this. So right now we have about 2 waves or 2 back and forths in the animation. If I decrease it more, let's say to 0.25, we introduce more waves and back and forths in the animation like this. Again, the period is the wavelength, the length between the waves in the elastic curve. The lesser it is, more waves we have in our animation. I can set it to, let's say, 0.1 and have something like this. Now is a good time to use the playback speed and play back our animation in slow motion. Let's say to 0.1x speed, that is 10%, and we have something like this. To recap, using the amplitude, we can control the amount of overshoot of the animation, and with the period, we can control the amount of back and forths in our animation like this. And that's the different type of interpolations and easings we can apply to our keyframes in the animation mode. By default, the playback mode of an animation is one shot. If we play the animation, it goes from start to the end of our timeline and finishes the animation. Instead, if we want to repeat our animation, say the ellipse, go down, go back up, go down again, and repeat the movement, then we can change the playback mode of our timeline from this drop down. Right now, it is set to one shot. Instead, we can set it to loop. And now if I play the animation, it will go from start of the timeline to the end and jump back to the start and keep repeating our animation like this. When it performs the jump from end to start, the jump is also visible in the ellipse's position. Instead, if we want a smooth animation, that is a perfect loop, we have to make sure the end of our animation is the same as the start of our animation because we have a jump there. To ensure that, we can simply copy the starting keyframe and paste it at the end. But before we do that, I can move this keyframe to the center of the timeline. So we have the animation of the ellipse going down, and then we can copy this keyframe, select it, copy it, and paste it at the end. And now if I play the animation, we have a perfect loop of the ellipse moving up and down like this. I can select the keyframes, apply easing, and finish the animation. Right now, it seems as if the ellipse is floating mid-air. Instead, if we want it to seem like dropping from the top, then hitting the bottom, and then bouncing back up, then we'll have to change how we have applied easing to the keyframes. To do that, I can open the graph editor and preview the animation curve. Again, only inspecting the same, not editing the curves. So right now, when the ellipse falls down, it slows down as well because of easing out we have applied. And when it goes back up again, it slowly picks up the speed because of the ease in we have applied. And that's why it seems as if floating. Now what we can is remove this easing and create a hit and bounce effect. So I can select the first keyframe and remove the ease out portion from the interpolation panel like this. And now when it goes back up, there should be no easing as well. So I can remove the ease in portion and have something like this. So it falls down without slowing down and goes back up instantly as well. And overall, we have animation like this. One thing to note here is we have used the graph editor to only preview our animation path, that is the curve, and edited the same in the interpolation panel. So that's how you can use the graph editor as well. Let's go out of the graph editor and look at the other playback mode, that is ping pong. In the looping mode, it goes from start to the end and then jumps back to the start and loops the animation. Instead, we can set it to ping pong, and now it will go from start to end and back to the start in a alternate fashion like this. When we have a keyframe setup like this, we can remove the copy, put the other one at the end, and have something like this. Now because we have moved the keyframe further away, the animation is slower. If I want it to be in the same place and the loop to work, right now we'll have the delay if we don't. So instead of changing the animation duration, I can make use of the work area, that is inside of the timeline's duration. We can create a subset like this by dragging the handles and then use that as our animation's working area. And now the ping pong will work within this range like this. So that's the different playback modes in Rive animations. And that's just the basics. In the complete course, we'll take these and many more animations and connect it to the state machine. Use code WidyMagic20 and get an extra 20% off. If you're ready to learn, check out the full course. In this section, we will learn how to animate strokes with trim paths. We can enable trim paths from the stroke options by clicking trim. With the trim path options, we can control the stroke. Right now, it is invisible because both the start and the end value is set to 0%. We can increase the end value and draw the stroke. We can control the start as well with the start value. And with the offset, we can offset or move the whole stroke like this. There is also the trim path mode that is by default set to sequential. And to notice the difference between the two, we have to add another path to our shape. Before I do that, I can reset the trim path values and then duplicate the existing path and move it up. Now let's go back to the trim path options, and with the trim path mode set to sequential, if we increase the end value, we draw the lines one after the other, that is the strokes. But if I set the trim path mode to synced, then we control both of the strokes or the paths at the same time like this. So that's the trim path mode. Let's go ahead and look at another example. Here I have a fingerprint icon. If we want, we can enable trim path for the same as well. And with the trim path mode set to sequential, we draw the strokes one after the other, like this. Instead, if I set it to synced, then we'll control all of the strokes at the same time, like this. And that's how we use trim paths. Let's go ahead and create animations with the same in the next lesson. In this one, we'll create animations with trim path. For that, I've created a simple shape and applied 3 strokes to the same, one acting as the background, another one acting as the glow, that is the feathered stroke, and then a normal one. Now I've applied trim paths to the strokes as well to control the end and the start values and create animations. If I switch over to the animate mode, notice we have diamonds beside the trim path options, which means we can place keyframes and create animations with trim path options. Let's go ahead and do just that. Create a basic animation of the stroke going from 0 to 100%. So I can go ahead and first of all place the artboard in the center and zoom in as well. Then select the stroke and place the keyframes, open the trim path options and set the end value to 0% at the start of our animation, and then place the playhead at the end of our timeline and set the end value to 100%. Now if I play back the animation, we have the stroke going from 0 to 100%. If we want, we can animate the glow as well, that is the feathered stroke. The same thing as before, I can set the end value to 0%, and then at the end, that will be 100%. And this is the animation we have overall. Another thing to mention is I've set the default interpolation of this file to cubic, so we have the easing auto applied to new keyframes. If I want, I can edit the animation curve, that is the easing, and have something like this. Let's go ahead and create a looping animation with our stroke, something like this. To create the looping animation, we can animate both the trim end and the start one after the other. That is, we can first of all animate the trim end, say go from 20 to 100%, and then we can make the trim start come from 0 to 80% like this. And then we can loop the animation. So let's go ahead and do just that. I can reset the values and then in the animate mode, create a new timeline and then place our keyframes. So the end value at the start will be 20 and then halfway through it will be 100%. And then we'll animate the trim start. So key it in as well to be 0. And then at the end, it will be 80%. So roughly 20% of our stroke is visible. And this is what we have. Let's go ahead and repeat the steps for the glow as well. So I can open its stroke options and apply the same values. The end will be 20. Halfway through, it will be 100. Key in the start value. And then at the end of our timeline, it will be 80%. Now if I go ahead and play back the animation, we have something like this. Now what we want is to repeat our animation, that is have the stroke go back and forth in a looping fashion. And to do that, we can set the playback mode of this timeline to be ping pong and loop our animation. If you want to add a slight delay before the stroke starts moving again, we can position the keyframes a bit further from the edges like this. That is adding 5 frames of gap. And now there will be a slight pause before the stroke starts moving again. We can use another trick, that is offsetting the keyframes. Instead of starting the animation one after the other, that is first of all, we play the trim end animation and then the trim start. Instead, we can play them at the same time with a bit of an offset. To do that, I can create a new timeline, that is a duplicate of this, and then open the stroke options and then position the keyframes to be the same as each other. So they start at the same time. And if I play the animation now, it will look like as if we are animating the trim offset. Instead of starting them at the same time, we can add a bit of delay. That is, say after 10 frames, we will start the trim start animation. So I can select the keyframes and drag them a bit behind like this. And then I can select the end keyframes as well and drag them a bit before. So we have added a bit of delay, that is offset, in between the keyframes. First of all, the trim end keyframes start animating, and then the trim start. And if I play the animation, this is how it looks with offset between the keyframes. And with that, we have created 3 animations with trim paths, and that's how we animate strokes in Rive with trim paths. Go ahead and download the Rive backup file provided below with the assets for you to get started and create this spin animation with trim paths. When you're done, you can come back to this lesson and learn how to do the same. Let's go ahead and create the spin animation, for which we can use the trim offset. If we increase the value, we move the stroke around the shape, and if we set it to 100%, then we complete one exact rotation around the shape, using which we can create a looping animation. I can switch over to the Animate mode, reposition the artboard, and then open the trim path options and key in the trim offset to be 0% at the start, and then at the end of our animation, let's set it to 100%. And then if I play the animation, we have the stroke circle around the shape, and if we want to loop the animation, we can set the playback mode to loop and loop our animation as well. One thing to note right now is there is a slight pause before the loop starts again, that is the stroke moving, and that's because of the easing applied to the keyframe, that is ease in and out. Instead, if we change the interpolation mode to linear, notice the pause is not there anymore. So that's one use case of the linear interpolation when creating looping animations like this. Let's go ahead and repeat the steps for the glow as well. That is the feathered stroke. Inside of the ellipse, we have one stroke and then the other feathered stroke with the glow. So I can key in the offset. And one thing to note here is in the timeline, we have the strokes. And if we would like to differentiate between them, we can give them names as well, each stroke layer. So this one will be the glow, and the other one, let's name it just stroke. And that will appear in the timeline as well. Move the 0% keyframe at the start of the timeline, and at the end, set the offset to 100%, and remove the easing from the keyframe as well. Set the interpolation to linear and preview the animation. For an added touch, we can try animating the trim end as well. That is, at the start, I can key in the trim end, that is 20%, and then halfway through, we can try increasing it, say to 40%, and then to complete the loop, I can set it back to 20% and have something like this, that is the trim end animation in the middle. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the glow stroke as well. I can key in the end value or simply copy the keyframes from above. I can select the trim end keyframes, copy them, and then select the trim end inside the glow stroke and paste the keyframes like this. Right now, the stroke moves once around the circle, that is rotates. Instead, if we want to increase that, we can try increasing the trim offset. If I set it to 200%, then that will be 2 times rotation around the circle in 1 second. I can change the glow as well. If I go ahead and play the animation, we have something like this. Now, if we want the same speed as before and 2 times rotation, then we can try increasing the timeline duration, say to 2 seconds, and then we can move the keyframes around, that is reposition them, or we can simply change the playback speed of our animation. That is, if I set it to 0.5, that is half time, and play the animation, we have the same. That is, without changing the timeline duration, the position of the keyframes, we get half the speed of the stroke, that is the trim offset. There are many ways to create loading spin animations. I'll put some references, so go ahead and try to recreate a few. In this one, we'll create an animation with this location pin icon. For the animation, we can animate the trim offset of this ellipse, that is move the stroke around, and then we can animate the position of the pin as well, up and down. Let's go ahead and switch over to the animate mode, reposition the artboard, and then I can key in the trim offset of the ellipse. So open the stroke options and key in the offset, that is 20% by default. And then at the end of our animation, we can set it to 100%, but that won't complete our animation. That is a perfect loop. Because we are starting at 20%, we have to end there as well visually. And to get that value, we can simply add 100% to the starting value and get the same. That is 120% in this case. Let's go ahead and set the playback mode of this timeline to loop. And now if I go ahead and play the animation, we have the loop going on. Now before each loop, we have a slight delay. That's because of the easing applied. I can remove it and set it to linear interpolation and have a continuous motion instead. Next, let's go ahead and animate the pin. I can key in its Y value in the middle. We can move it a bit up, and then at the end, paste the first keyframe and complete our loop. Now to make the animation more interesting, we can try rotating the pin as well, like this. To achieve that, we can change the scale value of our pin, that is the X scale, and rotate the pin like this from 100% to negative 100% like this. But when we do that, the stroke gets scaled as well, squished in this case. Instead, we want to preserve the outline of the object. That is, keep the stroke width the same as it is in the 100%. To do that, we can open the stroke options and disable apply transform. And now if I decrease the scale of the object, the stroke won't scale with the same. Now we can go ahead and create the animation. So let's reset the values, go back to the animate mode, select the shape, and then at the start of our timeline, key in the X scale value to 100%, and then at the end, it will be negative 100%. If I scrub through the timeline, we have the rotation of the icon and in our loop as well. So that's a simple tip you can use, that is disable apply transform for shapes and preserve the outline of an object. Now we can end the animation here, but let's go ahead and also animate the inner glow. Right now we have a feathered fill layer and its direction is set to inner, but unlike the stroke, we cannot animate it. So I'll go ahead and create a duplicate of this ellipse instead and feather out its stroke. So let's go ahead and create a duplicate of this ellipse. I'll place it below and call it inner glow. And then I can remove the fill layer from the duplicate and then feather out its stroke layer. Let's increase the amount, say to 25. And now to keep it only inside the ellipse, I can apply clipping and select the original ellipse as the source. So we get the same behavior as before. And now we can control the offset as well and move it around. So let's animate it with the ellipse. I can key in the 20% at the start, and at the end, it will be 120%. And now if we play back, the glow animates with the stroke as well. Now because easing is applied by default, we have the different movements of the stroke and the glow. I can remove it, that is set to linear interpolation, and complete the animation. And that's how we can animate with trim paths. In this section, we will learn how to create animations with custom shapes with vertices. In this one, we'll animate this eye icon. For the animation, we can go over to the vertice editor with the shape selected. And then if I select any vertice and switch over to the animate mode, notice we have diamonds beside the vertice properties, its position, and the curve angle, as well as the handle. Before we create the animation, let's go over the shape. We have 3 points on the top and then 3 points on the bottom, as well as some points in the middle. If we want to create the animation of the eye closing, we can move these 3 points below, that is the upper curve, and then change their angle as well to create the eye closing animation. Now we can make this a lot easier for us. That is, instead of dealing with 3 points, we can just have 1 point. To control the upper curve, I can remove the 2 and select the middle one, change its type to mirrored, and increase the angle to have something like before. So instead of dealing with 3 points, we just have 1 and move it down to close the eye like this. And this is part of the process as well. When importing external assets, most of the times you will have extra points or extra vertices. Before creating animations, you can always inspect the shape and remove the unnecessary things, like in this case. So I can undo the changes for now, go outside of the vertice editor, and then create a duplicate of the shape to use as a reference. So I can put this below, change the opacity, say to 25%, and then I can go back to the eye shape and go to the vertice editor and do the same things as before. That is, select the 2 points, delete them, select the middle one, change its type to mirrored, and change the handle length as well. Let's say to 60 and get something like before the original shape. I can repeat the same on the below curve as well. Remove the extra points, select the middle one, change the type to mirrored, and have the same length as above. Let's set it to say 68 and create a symmetric shape here as well. Next, I can select the middle points as well and simplify them as well. So instead of 2, I can have 1 point in the middle. Let's do the same thing on the other direction. 1 point in the middle, and then select the extra ones, delete them, delete the extra ones on the other side as well. Now we can change their curve type. I can select the points and set their type to mirrored as well, and change the length to replicate the shape we had before. Let's set it to say 10, and we have something like this. Again, instead of dealing with 3 or more points, now we just have 1 point to control the curve and create the eye closing animation like this. Let's exit out of the vertice editor and then delete the duplicate shape. Now we can create the animation. So switch over to the animate mode and then select the shape, go to the vertice editor, select the upper point and key in its position. So I can key in its Y position. Let's key in the X as well. And then say 30 frames ahead, I can move it down to the same position as the bottom handle. Next, if I want, I can edit these vertices as well. That is their length. So I can select the vertices, key in the length, and then say here, when the eye is closed, we can decrease it, say to 5, and have something like this. I can decrease it further as well to shorten the distance between the two parts. And we have the eye closing animation. Now the pupil should be hidden as well when the eye is closed. For that, we can simply use clipping. I can select the pupil shape, apply clipping, select the eye as the source, and we have the same, the clipping applied. And finally, to finish things off, when the eye is closed, we can show the eyelashes as well. Right now, they are hidden because the trim options are set to 0%. If I increase the trim end, you can see they appear, Now they animate from the opposite direction, that is from bottom to top. Instead, if I want to reverse the direction, I can set both start and end to 100% and then decrease the start value like this. Let's do just that. I can again go back to animate mode, and then when the eye is about to be closed, let's say 10 frames ahead, I can key in the start value, and then 20 frames ahead, I can set the start value to 0 and complete the animation. Let's go ahead and preview the same. I can reposition the artboard and preview our animation. If you want, you can reposition the keyframes as well to get what you want. And that's how we animate custom shapes with vertices. Here is a classic example. We have the menu and the cross icon. Let's go ahead and create an icon animation between the menu and the cross. Before we do that, let's inspect the menu icon shape that we will animate. Inside of the shape layer, we have 3 parts, that is 3 lines made up of 2 vertices, as simple as that. For the animation, we can simply animate the position of the vertices, that is change it to a cross like this. Let's go ahead and undo the changes and start the animation. Before that, I can make the cross visible, keep it in the background, and change its opacity, say to 50%, and use it as a reference. Let's go ahead and jump over to the animation mode, and then first of all, key in the current position of each vertice. So I can select all the path layers, open the vertice editor, select the vertices, and key in the X and the Y position like this. That is the default position of the vertices. Then we can go 20 frames ahead, and path by path, I can change the position of the vertices and make the cross icon like this. The next one will change it to the other part of the cross icon, and we have a extra path as well. For that, we can simply blend it in with the other paths like this and complete our animation, that is the transition between the menu and the cross icon. Now to make it more interesting, we can add a in-between state, that is instead of directly going from menu to cross, we can add a in-between shape that will be just a single line. So first of all the paths inside of the menu will become one, that is we can animate their position like this, and then this line will become a cross. Let's go ahead and do just that. I can create a new timeline and copy the first keyframe of the menu icon shape, that is the default position, that will be the same. And then 20 frames ahead, I can start changing the positions. So I can paste that keyframe again, and on top of that, I can apply the changes. That will be the position change like this. The middle one will stay the same, and we already have pasted that keyframe. The bottom one will come up, and that is our transition from menu to a single line. And from here, we can change it to a cross. So select the path and do the same thing as before. Change the position of the vertices and make the cross icon. I will position it here just like before. And then the last one will complete the cross shape. And we have our animation. If I play it through, this is what we get. So the menu becomes one line, and then that becomes a cross shape. I can apply a elastic interpolation for the keyframes and have the animation like this. So that's how we can create icon animations with the vertices.